The first thing I'm going to talk to you guys about is where peer review fits into the job of the editors of the BJGP, and we're speaking, most of this session is from the perspective of the BJGP. Obviously every journal does things slightly differently, but there's a lot of commonalities in how the review process works. So anytime a paper comes through to the BJGP, it will be looked at by the editors first. We'll consider which ones will go out for peer review and which we don't think are right for that. Then we'll look at the peer review comments and make a decision about whether it needs further revisions or not, and then sort of there's a bit of a process cycle from there. So I guess the first thing to say, if anyone is planning to submit or has submitted to the BJGP, your paper will be looked at by at least two of the editors. So Ewan looks over basically everything that comes into the journal, clearly a very busy man. And then amongst the research submissions, they get divided between Tom Nada and myself. And so I think on average, we'll see about 5 manuscripts a week, every week, all year round. It does kind of comes in peaks and troughs a bit, but it's quite a lot to get through because obviously we're a popular journal, which is fantastic. And so we would love to be able to spend the time and do a full, proper peer review of every manuscript we read, but realistically, with portfolio careers and things, that's hard to achieve. So there's a few sort of things we tend to focus on in terms of our decisions. And one of those decisions is this worth going out to peer review? So for anyone who said, yes, I've done peer review before, can I please say a sincere thank you? We are very mindful that we are asking our peer reviewers to give up and volunteer their time to help us. And it's very hard to properly recognise that contribution. And someone tried to put a figure on it. This is a paper that's a few years old now. The estimate was 100 million hours of peer review of academic papers globally in 2020 alone. In the UK, that was estimated to cost nearly £300 million, and you think of the rate of expansion of journals and papers and scientific knowledge out there, these figures are probably out of date by quite a long way. So a sincere thank you, and it's something that we constantly think about, is not wasting our peer reviewers' time, because we do really much value it. But after that kind of initial peer review, we'll be thinking about, should we take this, it's a perfect paper, it doesn't need any fixing, let's just take it forward, or do we need some tweaks? Or having looked at the peer review and thought about what the peer reviewers thought, is this not right for us? If you are an author and you do get a request for revisions, there's a few simple tips we have. So please try and address each point made by the reviewers very clearly. Some people structure tables in their responses or different ways of addressing it. Helps us too, to sort of look and see how much has been changed as a result of peer review. For any researchers out there, if you disagree with what a reviewer has said, please do argue your case. You know your research better than anybody else. I've had early career researcher colleagues that say to me, I'm so desperate to get published, I'll just accept everything the peer reviewer says because I just want my paper through. And actually, if we get a feel for that in your response, it kind of gives us less confidence in what you've done because you guys know your research best. If you're just taking what some other person has said as gospel, maybe the strength of the research might not be as strong as we'd hoped. And we're all researchers too. We've all had the dreaded reviewer too, who will slate your paper and go off on a tangent or get on their high horse. We do, as an editor team, we do look very closely at what the peer reviewers say before we go back to the authors. If we feel the peer reviewers have completely missed the point, or they've been really unfair, or they've given us 2 lines to say, please don't publish this, we will go out and get more review. So we aim for at least 2, but sometimes we need to get 3, 4 reviews. Sometimes we ask the editorial board to look at specific papers if it's a bit borderline. So we're mindful of that too. And then, obviously we go through the rounds of trying to make a decision on that. So that's where peer review fits into the process for us at the journal. But now there was the question of how to, which is what the majority of sort of people have highlighted in both of these sessions. Is that what they want to learn about? So firstly, how to get started. So if you're interested and you'd like to peer review us, you can just sign up, and we would be very grateful for that. So on the BJGP website, there is a section about peer review. You can navigate to that. You basically create yourself an account with the journal, give us your details, and you can specify what your areas of interest are, because that really helps Tom and Nada and I when we're going out looking for peer reviewers and we go through the journal's database. We can sort of look at, who says they've got expertise in women's health or biostatistics or health economics, and can start there. If you have been an author for the journal, when you set up your profile as an author, you'll automatically get asked if you'd be willing to be peer reviewers for us, and we very much hope you'd be willing to do that. And if you're starting out, we encourage and be very happy to sort of say, think about doing it jointly with a trusted senior colleague, whether that's your supervisor, your line manager, a senior person in your department, and feel free to get feedback on your peer review, come to us if you want. I've had an academic GP trainee, she peer reviewed for us for the first time, and then she independently emailed myself and Ewan and said, can I have some feedback on my peer review, please? And she did a really great job. We didn't have to say much to improve it for next time, but we are very happy to work with reviewers if you want some feedback and support. We'll invite you because you have some expertise to bring to this paper. We don't just invite people at random. We try and find people who have some understanding of the area. And again, Tom and Nada and I are not experts on everything. We're a generalist journal, so we get lots of different stuff. So we need the help of peer reviewers to understand how good and how accurate this paper is. So please bring your expertise to the table because you definitely have some. We encourage you to read it through carefully and you have maybe an initial read through to sort of take it all in, see what the authors are saying, see what the study shows, think about it generally, and then kind of look to get into the more specifics. And do share your thoughts and be open about your thoughts. And please also be specific where possible, highlighting certain sections of the manuscript or certain issues that you want to raise to help us understand what you think, but also help the author respond in due time. It's in my bag somewhere. This is available on the website as a PDF. This document is also available on the BJGP desk just outside. Tom's got a version just there. So if you're interested in some resource that the journal provides, both for BJGP and Open, please access it electronically or in print copy. We've got both. This was prepared by the previous editor of the journal, Professor Roger Jones, and has a whole swathe of chapters from different experts in primary care research about different methodologies, different subject matter, about sort of specific issues around critical appraisal there, but it's also got some very generic content that can be applicable to lots of different manuscripts. So please do have a look. And this is something that's taken out of that piece, and it's got some more general sort of questions about critical appraisal. So does the paper describe the background of the study clearly and ask a clear research question? And if you've got to the end of the introduction, you're getting to the methods and you don't know what this is about or why they've done the study, then not off to a great start there. So that's got to be clear. Are the aims clearly stated? Come back to Cass talk this morning. It can be a research question, it can be aims, as long as that's clear in one way or the other. Are the methods sufficiently clear and detailed enough that it could be reproduced? Because obviously that's a central tenet of scientific research, is that it can be understood and reproduced. Do they clearly present the results and use appropriate sort of figures or tables to try and summarise that for the reader? Thinking about how they've sampled and recruited to their study and have they reported their inclusion criteria clearly, and not all the methodological detail might be in the main paper. There might be some relevant stuff in the supplementary files, or they might have published a protocol previously, but they should have referenced that and highlighted that if it's not going to be in the main paper for you. And then, have they placed this appropriately in the existing literature? Have they thought about the strengths and weaknesses and some of the other important things in terms of funder and conflict of interest and things? So those are kind of generic questions to ask as a reviewer or someone critically appraising a paper, and then there are obviously specific methodological considerations. So coming back to the sort of key questions that we often look at and we encourage our peer reviewers to look at is, what's the justification for research? Is it clear? Does it clearly explain why the question has been chosen? Are the methods appropriate to that research question, and have they been well conducted? And really crucially, how relevant are these findings to the BJGP audience? In our case, but whatever journal you're reviewing for. Brill. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you. I'll pass over to Tom.
Hi everyone, so my name's Dr. Thomas Round. I'm a GP and Associate Editor of the Journal. I'm a clinical academic at King's College, so pleasure to speak to you today. And just a little bit of reflection on my journey into academia and writing. I was actually, Roger Jones gave me my first break in academic general practice. He was our previous editor, and he got me to peer review for BJGP before I'd even written anything. And it's actually a really good experience about how to critically appraise a paper. What makes for a good paper, what makes for good writing, even before actually writing my own research. So I could see we had quite a lot of people who are new researchers, maybe not done peer review. It's a great opportunity, and that can be either with your academic department, maybe partnering with someone who's more experienced, or even just getting in contact with us and saying, could I have feedback on the peer review process? And these are sort of some of the key questions. These are the key questions also when we triage. So we get a lot of submissions to the BJGP, and I'll just take you through those very briefly. But as I say, we would look at maybe 5 submissions a week sometimes, and we make that triage process as to whether that goes to a peer reviewer or not. And so we look at the sort of research question, are the methods and the key findings, and really thinking that the BJGP is funded by the RCGP. It goes to all GPs who are registered with the college. Is this good science? Is it embedded in primary care? What relevance has this got to general practitioners and to practice and policy? And I think that's really important as well, along with the good methodology. And the methods, probably the more analysis will go in more in-depth peer review. So just having a little look at, these are the submissions for the past year. You can see there that's looking at qualitative, quantitative, RCTs, systematic reviews. And if we go drill down a bit more detail, we had 658 submissions, but you can see there that through that triage process, we got rid of 452. So that's what we're doing as editors. So actually, we would take out about 2/3 of papers before even sending to peer review. So just over 200 were then sent out to peer reviewers. So a lot of those might be, if they're not, for example, a lot of quantitative papers, it might be that they're not relevant to primary care. There might be hospital data. A lot of the submissions we had quite a few from China, and then they're from secondary care data sets. They're not relevant to general practitioners. So that would be sort of key, look at the title, looking at the data sets, and if it's embedded in primary healthcare or not. And you can see there majority of the, systematic reviews and the qualitative research, and that's the total number that we published. And the total number we published probably would be about half that, so about 100 papers. So once something goes for peer review, probably it's a 50-50 chance we're going to publish that. But when you're getting involved in research, including writing up or submitting for grant applications, you have to get used to be resilient and get used to rejection. So you might have a paper that you submit to one journal and say no, then you actually say, what's in scope, what can I, and everything is a learning opportunity. We talk about making every contact count in the NHS with our patients. It's the same with this process in academia. It's making every contact count. What's the sort of feedback that I can get? How can I improve my work, craft it a bit better? And we run an open peer review process. So when you get involved with us, you can see who the journal writers are, and you'll have your name on the peer review. So the key thing there is professionalism, being open and respectful. I think that's a key thing. Also, I would say I would write a peer review as if what I'd want to see to myself. Actually, what's a critical appraisal? What is a positive thing? What could be done better for this paper? So we wanted to do a little, rather than just talking at you, we want to make this slightly interactive. We want you to have a go at peer reviewing a paper. So if you scan that QR code, it'll take you to BJGP website. And this is a recently published paper, so we're not in any ethical trouble here, because it is a BJGP paper, and we have the first author who just spoke to you, Dr. Sam Merriel. So you can critique his paper. So we're going to do a little, so as I say, scan that QR code, and what I'd like you to do is initially just read through the paper. And I would say that's a really good idea when you're doing a peer review. Just give your initial impressions, read through the paper, see what your first impressions are, and then maybe in small groups, 2s and 3s. I think we kind of split into little 2s and 3s. We'll do this for about 10 minutes or so, so just have a sort of initial read through yourself. I think this is a really important area. It is very topical around PSA testing. There's a lot in the news about this. It's very topical for practice and policy. So yeah, have a little read through and then start answering some of those questions. And we'll come back to you in about, we'll say, 5-10 minutes or so.
So my name is Nada Khan. So I'm a GP based in Exeter. I'm also an academic clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter, alongside my role as associate editor of the BJGP. So yeah, wearing lots of hats. But I'm going to talk to you today about the future of peer review. I'm going to touch on a few things. But I think the first thing to recognize is that peer review is really embedded in the way that we work in academia. So thinking about grant proposals, about how we do our master's dissertations, PhD dissertations, and academic publishing is the same. This is how we look to improve and build on research and also learn how to critically appraise other people's work as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges of peer review. And the first thing I want to touch on is it fair? And I hope from Sam's slides you have got an appreciation of the idea that the way we use peer review at the BJGP is to help us as editors guide our decision making. So the peer review process is where we would go out to a group of experts, which is you as peer reviewers, to get your advice about the paper, its methodology, and its impact on research. And often we'll be looking for specific peer reviewers. So for a stats paper, we might look for someone who's got a lot of statistical expertise, or we might be looking for topic-specific expertise as well. So we really try to focus our peer reviews on what we think we would gain from them in terms of giving us advice about whether or not we should take the paper forward. Can it detect fraud and fabrication? And the short answer is probably no, not 100%, but we do have mechanisms to try to limit it. We have a huge database of peer reviewers, and I hope you'll all join that database as well. And we search that database to find reviewers that we think would be appropriate for that paper. Authors are also allowed to suggest reviewers for their own paper, but we do take a bit of a critical look at those reviewers because we know that that's one way that the whole system could be open to bias. So authors might suggest reviewers who they feel would be warm to their area of research, or potentially even in a more fraudulent way that they've sort of coached for that review. We also know that reviewers may be warm to certain areas. So if it's a paper that supports their research, they might be more likely to give a positive review. But if it's a paper that goes against their own findings, then they might write a very highly critical review. So again, we're very aware of these different things that might potentially impact on whether or not a reviewer is providing a positive or negative review. Another way that we try to mitigate against that is that we have an open peer review process. So Tom's touched upon this, but essentially reviewers are aware of the authors' names, affiliations, and when you send in a peer review, you sign it. So the authors of the paper are aware of who's actually done the peer review for that paper. And we hope that that just provides a very open way, transparent way, so everyone's aware of who's been involved in the process. There's been some really interesting research, though, around the fact that some peer reviewers might be less likely to provide a negative review of a very highly esteemed person in a field, or if researchers are from a certain institution. We also had a question in the last session about what peer reviewers might feel in terms of conflicts of interest. So if you're trying to get a job at the University of Manchester, I'm applying for a job in Sam's group, and I've been sent a paper of his to peer review. Should I take that on? Should I write back to the journal and say, actually, I think I'm conflicted here? Would I potentially sort of bias that review? And the last thing I wanted to touch on is it efficient? So we know that there are lots of more papers coming through, there's lots of new journals, and your time is precious. So we're trying to make this process as efficient as possible. Tom's touched on the point that not all papers go out for review because we're really aware of the time requirements that it takes. And that's when we try to make it efficient. But I just wanted to touch on this paper that was published by our colleagues Hajira and Adam at BJGP Open. And they talk a little bit about the future of peer review. One thing that they touch upon that we had a bit of a discussion about after the last session was group peer reviews. And I don't know if any of you have been involved with this, but we've had a few peer reviews come back to us where we've got a group of researchers at a department, often in a sort of journal club type setting, who have done the peer review together. So kind of similar to what you guys are doing in small groups, actually just chatting through the paper, maybe learning from each other's experience and then feeding that back to us. And we're quite open to that kind of thing. At BJGP Open, they have sometimes taken that a step forward, and a member of the editorial team joins that group, and then it's a very collaborative decision, which is, I think, quite a nice way of doing it. The other thing that Hajira and Adam touch upon here is the use of AI, and I'm just going to touch upon that. So I think AI, it's an interesting thing, the promise of AI, and how it's actually starting to really infiltrate into academic research and clinical work as well. And we've had a bit of a think about AI and how it might actually add to the peer review process. There's a really interesting paper that was published looking at 3,000 papers. And what they did in that research was they had those papers reviewed by a human, and then they put it into ChatGPT and looked to see how the two different types of peer review worked. And they actually found quite good inter-rater agreement between what ChatGPT thought and what the human reviewer thought. And we put Sam's paper into ChatGPT as well, and it actually came up with a pretty good peer review of it, which I think he found quite interesting, actually. But the main things that ChatGPT was good at was looking at methodology, looking at theoretical frameworks, and actually provided a really unbiased critical review of the paper, and authors really enjoyed that review. So I think it's an area we need to think about in the future, whether tools like AI might be able to act as a second reviewer or might be able to act a little bit more in the triage system, but I think it's an area that we just need to keep an eye on. And I'm just going to talk briefly over these slides because Tom actually asked AI, what could peer review do?
You probably all know now, Google, it gives you the Google AI summary. That's changed in the past couple of months. And I actually asked her, I said, what is the future of peer review? And this is what the AI told me.
Yeah, so...
The AI said, increase use of AI.
But I think some of the things that we've talked about, so is it more efficient, is it less biased, might be able to provide a bit more sort of this unbiased opinion that we worry a lot about as editors. And yeah, just some of the different ideas around potential use of AI in the future. But what we really wanted to do in the last few minutes was really open it up to you guys, just to get your thoughts about how we can improve the process. If you have any feedback for us, we'd be very willing to hear it.